The rain hammered against the windows of the small apartment as Officer Marcus Thompson sat in his patrol car, responding to what dispatch had called a domestic disturbance. His German Shepherd partner, Rex, sat alert in the back seat, sensing the tension that always came with these calls. Marcus had been a police officer for 12 years, and domestic calls were never easy. They often involved broken families, shattered dreams, and children caught in the crossfire. As he pulled up to the run-down apartment complex on Maple Street, Marcus noticed the flickering streetlight casting eerie shadows across the parking lot. The building looked tired, with peeling paint and broken steps leading to the second floor. He could hear shouting coming from apartment 2B, where Mrs. Chen had called about her neighbors. The voices were getting louder, and Marcus knew he needed to act quickly. Rex whined softly from the back seat, picking up on the aggressive energy radiating from the building. Marcus had trained with Rex for 3 years, and the dog had an uncanny ability to read situations before they escalated. Tonight felt different, somehow heavier, with an undercurrent of desperation that made both officer and dog uneasy. Marcus grabbed his radio and called for backup, though he knew it would be at least 10 minutes before another unit could arrive. He couldn't wait that long. The shouting had turned into screaming, and he heard what sounded like furniture being thrown. Children's voices could be heard crying in the background, high-pitched and terrified. Every instinct told him that someone inside was in immediate danger. He stepped out of the patrol car, his hand instinctively checking his service weapon while his other hand reached back to open Rex's compartment. The dog bounded out, immediately focusing on the apartment building. Rex's ears were pinned back, and his body language indicated he was ready for whatever they might encounter. Marcus had learned to trust his partner's instincts completely. The hallway of the apartment building smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap cleaning products. The carpet was worn thin, and several of the overhead lights had burned out, leaving pools of darkness between the functioning fixtures. As Marcus climbed the stairs with Rex beside him, the shouting became clearer. A man's voice was roaring about money and respect, while a woman's voice pleaded for him to calm down. Outside apartment 2B, Marcus paused to listen and assess the situation. He could hear at least 2 children crying, their sobs punctuating the adult argument like a heartbreaking soundtrack. The man inside was clearly intoxicated, his words slurring together as he raged about his job, his life, and everything that had gone wrong. The woman kept trying to reason with him, her voice growing more desperate with each exchange. Marcus knocked firmly on the door, identifying himself as police. The shouting stopped abruptly, replaced by whispered arguing and the sound of hurried footsteps. Rex remained perfectly still beside him, every muscle tensed and ready. Marcus knew that whatever was happening inside had just escalated to a new level of danger. The silence stretched on for nearly a minute before Marcus heard the woman's voice, shaky and frightened, asking him to wait just a moment. He could hear the man hissing instructions, probably telling her what to say. Marcus had been in enough of these situations to know that the next few minutes would determine whether this ended peacefully or became something much worse. When the door finally opened, Marcus found himself looking at a young woman with tear-streaked cheeks and a bruise forming under her left eye. She was trying to smile, but her hands were shaking as she held the door only partially open. Behind her, Marcus could see overturned furniture and broken glass scattered across the floor. The woman introduced herself as Sarah Mitchell and insisted that everything was fine, just a small disagreement that had gotten out of hand. Rex remained focused on the apartment interior, his training telling him that the immediate threat had not passed. Marcus could see movement in the shadows behind Sarah, and he knew that her husband was likely listening to every word. The children had gone quiet, which somehow felt more ominous than their earlier crying. Marcus had learned that when children suddenly stopped making noise during domestic disputes, it usually meant they were hiding or had been threatened into silence. Sarah kept glancing nervously over her shoulder as she spoke to Marcus, her story about a simple argument becoming less believable with each word. She claimed her husband had already left through the back door, but Marcus could see fresh boot prints in the hallway behind her. Rex's nose twitched as he picked up multiple scents from inside the apartment, confirming that several people were still present despite Sarah's claims. The situation was becoming more complex by the moment, and Marcus knew he needed to make a decision quickly. His backup was still several minutes away, and every second of delay could mean more danger for the family inside. He had to balance his duty to investigate with the immediate safety of everyone involved, including his loyal partner Rex, who continued to monitor the situation with unwavering attention. Marcus gently asked Sarah if he could step inside to check on the children, explaining that he had heard them crying and needed to ensure they were safe. Sarah's eyes darted nervously toward the back of the apartment before she reluctantly stepped aside. As Marcus entered with Rex, he immediately noticed two small faces peering around the corner of a doorway. Twin girls, probably around 6 years old, with matching pigtails and identical expressions of fear. The apartment was in worse condition than Marcus had initially seen from the doorway. A coffee table had been overturned, its glass top shattered into dangerous shards. Picture frames lay broken on the floor, their family photos now scattered and torn. The couch had been pushed against the wall at an odd angle, and there were holes punched in the drywall near the kitchen entrance. This wasn't the result of a simple argument. This was evidence of sustained violence. Rex moved carefully through the debris, his training allowing him to navigate the dangerous terrain while keeping his attention focused on potential threats. The dog's presence seemed to provide some comfort to the twin girls, who slowly emerged from their hiding spot behind the doorway. They wore matching pink pajamas that were now dirty and wrinkled, suggesting they had been hiding for quite some time. Sarah followed Marcus's gaze to her daughters and quickly moved to stand between them and the officer. She whispered something to the girls that Marcus couldn't quite hear, but their response was immediate. Both children stepped back into the shadows, their eyes wide with a fear that went beyond tonight's incident. Marcus recognized the look of children who had witnessed domestic violence repeatedly, their natural trust in adults replaced by a survival instinct that no child should ever need to develop. From somewhere deeper in the apartment came the sound of a door creaking open, followed by heavy footsteps. Sarah's entire body tensed, and she unconsciously moved to position herself between Marcus and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Rex's ears perked up and the dog shifted his weight slightly, preparing for whatever might emerge from the back of the apartment. A man appeared in the hallway, tall and heavy-set with bloodshot eyes, and the unmistakable smell of alcohol radiating from his clothes. David Mitchell looked like he had been in a fight, with scratches on his face and his shirt torn at the sleeve. He tried to appear casual as he approached, but Marcus could see the anger simmering just beneath the surface. David's hands were clenched into fists, and he kept glancing toward the front door as if calculating his chances of making a run for it. Marcus introduced himself calmly, explaining that neighbors had called about a disturbance and that he needed to check on everyone's welfare. David immediately became defensive, claiming that what happened in his own home was nobody else's business. His voice rose with each word, and Sarah instinctively moved closer to her daughters, gathering them protectively against her. Sighed. The twin girls watched the interaction between their father and the police officer with the kind of intense attention that suggested they had learned to read adult moods as a matter of survival. Marcus noticed how they stayed close to their mother, while keeping their distance from David, their body language revealing more about the family dynamics than any words could convey. Rex remained perfectly positioned between Marcus and David, the dog's training evident in how he monitored the situation without appearing aggressive. David seemed nervous about the dog's presence, his eyes frequently darting to Rex as if trying to assess whether the animal posed a threat. Marcus had seen this reaction before from suspects who were considering violence. The sudden realization that they weren't just dealing with one officer, but with a highly trained team. David began to pace back and forth in the small living room, his agitation growing with each step. He kept muttering about his rights and how the police had no business in his home without a warrant. Sarah remained silent, but Marcus could see her exchanging meaningful glances with her daughters. There was clearly a communication system in place, probably developed over months or years of living with David's unpredictable behavior. The atmosphere in the apartment grew more tense by the moment. David's pacing became more erratic, and he started gesturing wildly as he spoke about how everyone was against him. He complained about his job, his neighbors, and even his own family, painting himself as the victim in every situation. Marcus had heard these same justifications countless times before from domestic abusers who refused to take responsibility for their actions. Sarah tried to calm her husband down, speaking in the soft, careful tone that Marcus recognized from other domestic violence situations. She was walking on eggshells, trying to prevent an escalation while protecting her children. The twin girls seemed to understand their mother's strategy, remaining perfectly still and quiet as they watched their father's increasingly agitated behavior. Marcus knew he was running out of time. His backup still hadn't arrived, and David's behavior was becoming more unpredictable with each passing minute. Rex continued to monitor the situation with professional focus, but Marcus could sense his partner's growing concern about the family's safety. The next few minutes would determine whether this situation could be resolved peacefully, or whether it would spiral into something much more dangerous for everyone involved. Without warning, David's demeanor shifted from agitated to explosive. He suddenly lunged toward Sarah, grabbing her arm roughly and shouting about how she had embarrassed him by calling the police. Sarah cried out in pain, and the twin girls immediately began sobbing again, their earlier silence shattered by their father's violent outburst. Marcus stepped forward to intervene, but David spun around with wild eyes, warning the officer to stay back. Rex instantly responded to the threat, moving into a protective stance between David and the rest of the family. The dog's training kicked in perfectly as he assessed the situation and positioned himself to protect the most vulnerable people in the room. David's attention shifted to the German Shepherd, and for a moment, his anger was replaced by uncertainty as he realized he was now facing a highly trained police dog. Marcus used David's momentary distraction to create more distance between the man and his family. He spoke in calm, authoritative tones, trying to de-escalate the situation while ensuring everyone's safety. Sarah used the opportunity to gather her daughters closer, whispering reassurances while keeping her eyes fixed on her husband's unpredictable movements. David seemed to realize that his situation had become much more complicated with the police officer and dog present. He began backing toward the hallway, his eyes darting between Marcus and Rex as he calculated his options. Marcus could see the man's mind racing, probably trying to decide whether to surrender, fight, or attempt to escape through one of the back rooms. The twin girls clung to their mother with desperate intensity, their small faces streaked with tears and twisted with fear. They had clearly witnessed their father's violence before, but having a police officer present seemed to make everything feel more real and frightening. Marcus noticed how they kept looking toward the front door, as if hoping for an escape route that would take them away from the chaos of their home life. Sarah's lip was bleeding from where David had grabbed her, but she seemed more concerned about her daughters than her own injuries. She kept stroking their hair and murmuring comforting words, trying to provide stability in a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. Marcus admired her strength in protecting her children even while she herself was in danger. David suddenly made a break for the hallway, pushing past overturned furniture as he headed toward what Marcus assumed was the back bedroom. Rex immediately pursued, his training directing him to prevent suspects from accessing areas where they might find weapons or escape routes. The dog's swift response caught David off guard and he stumbled, crashing into the wall with enough force to knock down several hanging pictures. Marcus followed quickly behind Rex, leaving Sarah and her daughters in the living room, but keeping them within his line of sight. He could hear David cursing and struggling in the hallway, probably trying to get to either a weapon or a back exit. Rex had effectively cornered the man, using his size and training to block David's path without engaging in actual physical contact. In the hallway, Marcus found David pressed against the wall with Rex maintaining a perfect guard position just out of arm's reach. The dog's intense focus and professional demeanor clearly intimidated David, who seemed to have finally realized that his situation was hopeless. Marcus could see sweat beading on the man's forehead as he looked back and forth between the officer and the German Shepherd. David's bravado began to crumble as the reality of his situation set in. He started making excuses and trying to minimize what had happened, claiming that he had just been having a bad day and that things had gotten out of hand. Marcus had heard these same justifications countless times from domestic abusers, the predictable pattern of violence followed by minimization and blame shifting. From the living room, Marcus could hear Sarah comforting her daughters, but their crying had taken on a different quality. It was no longer the immediate fear of physical danger, but something deeper and more heartbreaking. These children had been living with this violence for far too long, and Marcus knew that tonight's incident was probably just the latest in a long series of traumatic experiences. Rex maintained his position with perfect discipline, never taking his eyes off David while remaining responsive to Marcus's commands. The dog's presence had effectively neutralized the immediate threat, allowing Marcus to focus on securing the scene and ensuring everyone's safety. David seemed to understand that any attempt to move past Rex would result in immediate consequences. Marcus called out to Sarah, asking if she or her daughters needed medical attention. Her response was barely audible, but he could hear the exhaustion and defeat in her voice. This woman had been fighting to protect her children while living with an abusive partner, and Marcus could only imagine the toll it had taken on the entire family. The sound of approaching sirens finally reached the apartment, indicating that backup was arriving. Marcus felt a wave of relief knowing that additional officers would soon be on scene to help manage the situation. David's shoulders sagged as he heard the sirens, probably realizing that his options for escape or further violence had been completely eliminated by the arrival of more law enforcement. 2 additional officers arrived within minutes, their presence immediately changing the dynamics in the small apartment. Officer Jennifer Walsh, a veteran with 15 years of experience in domestic violence cases, took charge of securing David, while Marcus remained with Rex to monitor the family. The backup officers worked efficiently to handcuff David and read him his rights, their professional handling of the situation providing a sense of stability that had been absent since Marcus first entered the apartment. Sarah collapsed onto the damaged couch, finally allowing herself to show the exhaustion and trauma she had been hiding. The twin girls remained close to their mother, but Marcus noticed they were watching the police officers with intense curiosity rather than fear. It was as if they were trying to understand whether these strangers represented safety or just another source of unpredictability in their chaotic world. Officer Walsh approached Sarah with the gentle demeanor that came from years of working with domestic violence victims. She explained what would happen next, how David would be taken into custody, and what resources were available to help Sarah and her daughters. Marcus watched as Sarah's face showed a mixture of relief and terror, the complex emotions of someone whose abuser was being removed, but whose future remained uncertain. Rex moved closer to the twin girls, his training including specialized work with traumatized children. The dog seemed to sense their emotional state and positioned himself where they could touch him if they wanted to, providing a source of comfort that didn't involve words or complicated adult explanations. One of the girls tentatively reached out to pet Rex's head, and Marcus saw the first hint of a smile cross her face since he had arrived. As David was led from the apartment in handcuffs, he continued to shout threats and justifications. He blamed Sarah for calling the police, blamed his job for his stress, and blamed everyone except himself for the violence that had destroyed his family. The twin girls pressed closer to their mother as their father's voice echoed through the hallway, their small bodies trembling with a fear that went far beyond tonight's incident. Marcus began documenting the scene, taking photographs of the destroyed furniture, the holes in the walls, and Sarah's visible injuries. Each piece of evidence told a story of sustained domestic violence that had escalated over time. The apartment showed signs of multiple previous incidents, from old stains on the carpet to repaired damage that suggested this pattern of violence had been going on for months or even years. Officer Walsh worked with Sarah to complete the necessary paperwork for a restraining order, explaining the legal protections available, and connecting her with local domestic violence services. Sarah's hands shook as she signed the documents, but Marcus could see a determination growing in her expression. For the first time in probably a very long time, she was taking action to protect herself and her daughters. The twin girls had gradually moved closer to Rex, drawn by the dog's calm presence and gentle nature. Marcus watched as they whispered to each other, probably trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Their conversation was too quiet for him to hear, but their body language suggested they were beginning to feel safer with the police officers present. Emergency medical personnel arrived to check on Sarah's injuries, finding bruises in various stages of healing that confirmed the ongoing nature of the abuse. The paramedics worked gently with her, explaining each step of their examination and ensuring she understood her options for further medical care. The twin girls watched anxiously as their mother was treated, probably worried that she might be taken away from them. As the immediate crisis was being managed, Marcus began to think about the long-term implications for this family. The children would need counseling to deal with the trauma they had witnessed. Sarah would need support services to help her rebuild her life, and David would face serious criminal charges that could result in significant jail time. The path forward would be difficult, but at least they would be safe from immediate physical danger. Rex seemed to understand the emotional weight of the situation, remaining close to the family while maintaining his professional alertness. The dog's presence had been crucial in preventing the situation from escalating further, and Marcus felt grateful for his partner's training and instincts. Together, they had managed to protect a vulnerable family during one of the most dangerous types of police calls. Sarah asked Officer Walsh about temporary housing options, explaining that she had no family in the area and very little money saved. The reality of leaving an abusive relationship was setting in, with all the practical challenges that came with starting over with 2 young children. Marcus had seen this same conversation countless times. The moment when victims realized that escaping abuse was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. The apartment gradually became quieter as the immediate emergency was resolved. David had been transported to jail, the medical team had finished treating Sarah, and the additional officers were completing their reports. Marcus knew that his work here was largely finished, but he found himself reluctant to leave. Something about this family had touched him more deeply than usual, perhaps because of how the twin girls had responded to Rex or because of Sarah's quiet strength in protecting her children. As the other officers prepared to leave, Marcus knelt down to speak with the twin girls at their eye level. He wanted to check on them one final time and make sure they understood that they were now safe. The girls had been remarkably quiet throughout the entire ordeal, speaking only in whispers to each other and their mother. Their silence concerned Marcus, as he knew that children who became too quiet during traumatic events were often struggling with emotions too big for them to process. Rex positioned himself beside Marcus, somehow sensing that this conversation required his gentle presence. The dog's calm demeanor seemed to help the girls feel more comfortable, and Marcus noticed they kept reaching out to touch Rex's fur, as if drawing strength from the contact. Animals often provided a sense of safety for traumatized children that adults couldn't match, and Rex had been specially trained to work in these sensitive situations. Marcus spoke softly to the girls, explaining that their daddy would not be coming back tonight and that they would be safe with their mommy. He tried to use simple words that 6-year-olds could understand, while being honest about what had happened. Children often knew more about their family situations than adults realized, and Marcus had learned that gentle honesty was usually better than attempting to shield them from reality they had already witnessed. Sarah watched anxiously as Marcus spoke with her daughters, probably worried about what they might say or how they might react. She had been protecting them for so long that trusting strangers, even police officers, was difficult. Marcus could see the internal struggle in her expression as she tried to balance her gratitude for their help with her instinct to maintain control over her children's interactions with outsiders. One of the twin girls, slightly bolder than her sister, finally spoke up. Her voice was small and uncertain, but her words carried a weight that made Marcus's chest tighten with emotion. She looked directly at him and said that she was glad the police had come because her daddy had been making her mommy cry for a very long time. Her simple, honest statement revealed the depth of awareness these children had about their family's situation. The second twin nodded in agreement with her sister, adding that they had been hiding in their room because they were scared. Her words painted a picture of children who had learned to disappear during their father's violent episodes, probably developing survival strategies that no child should ever need. Marcus realized these girls had been living in a state of constant fear, never knowing when the next explosion of violence might occur. Marcus felt a surge of anger toward David Mitchell, not just for the violence against Sarah, but for the psychological trauma he had inflicted on his own children. These little girls should have been playing with toys and worrying about homework, not developing complex strategies for staying safe in their own home. The impact of domestic violence on children was something that stayed with Marcus long after each call ended. Rex seemed to sense the emotional intensity of the moment, moving even closer to the girls and allowing them to pet him more freely. The dog's presence provided a buffer that made it easier for the children to express their feelings, and Marcus was grateful for his partner's intuitive understanding of the situation. Rex had worked with traumatized children before, and his gentle responses seemed to encourage the girls to continue talking. Sarah began to cry as she listened to her daughters speak about their fear and awareness of the domestic violence. She had probably tried so hard to protect them from the worst of David's behavior, only to realize that they had been aware of everything all along. Marcus had seen this reaction from many mothers in similar situations, the devastating realization that their attempts to shield their children had not been as successful as they had hoped. The conversation with the twins revealed layers of trauma that went beyond tonight's incident. They spoke about nights when they had hidden under their beds, times when they had tried to comfort their mother after their father hurt her, and their constant worry that something terrible might happen. These children had been carrying an enormous emotional burden, trying to make sense of adult problems that even trained professionals found challenging to address. Marcus asked the girls if they had any questions about what would happen next, wanting to provide them with as much information as possible to help reduce their anxiety about the future. Children often feared the unknown more than known difficulties, and he hoped that understanding the process would help them feel more secure. Their questions revealed both their intelligence and their deep concern for their mothers. Well-being Officer Walsh approached to let Marcus know that arrangements had been made for Sarah and the girls to stay at a local domestic violence shelter for the night. The shelter had experience working with families in crisis and could provide immediate safety, as well as longer-term support services. Sarah looked relieved but also apprehensive about staying in an unfamiliar place with her daughters. As Marcus prepared to leave, he realized that this family had affected him more deeply than most cases. Perhaps it was the courage of the twin girls in speaking up about their experiences, or Sarah's determination to protect her children despite her own fear. Rex seemed equally reluctant to leave, continuing to stay close to the girls even as Marcus gathered his equipment. The girls asked if they would see Rex again, their faces showing the kind of hope that Marcus rarely encountered during domestic violence calls. He explained that while he couldn't promise they would meet again, he would always remember them and how brave they had been tonight. Their smiles in response to his words were the first genuine expressions of happiness he had seen from them since arriving at the apartment. Just as Marcus was about to leave the apartment with Rex, one of the twin girls tugged on his uniform sleeve. Her sister stood beside her, both girls looking up at him with expressions that seemed far too serious for their young faces. Marcus knelt down again, sensing that they had something important they needed to say. Rex moved closer as well, somehow understanding that this moment required his presence and support. The first girl glanced at her sister, as if seeking permission or courage before looking directly into Marcus's eyes. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her words cut through the air with startling clarity. She told Marcus that her daddy had made her mommy cry many times before, but tonight was different because he had said he was going to make mommy go away forever. The innocence in her voice made the threat even more chilling. Her twin sister nodded solemnly and added that they had heard their daddy talking on the phone earlier, telling someone that he was tired of dealing with their family and that tonight would be the last time anyone would bother him about anything. The girls had understood enough of the conversation to realize that their father was planning something much worse than his usual violence. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he processed what the children were telling him. Their words suggested that David Mitchell had been planning not just another domestic assault, but potentially something far more deadly. The girls had been hiding in their room, listening to their father make what sounded like preparations for a murder-suicide scenario. Sarah, who had been gathering a few belongings for their stay at the shelter, overheard her daughters talking to Marcus and immediately went pale. She rushed over to them, kneeling beside Marcus as she realized what they were revealing. Her hands began shaking as she understood how close they had all come to a tragedy that would have destroyed their family completely. Rex remained perfectly still, allowing both girls to lean against him as they continued to share their frightening knowledge. The dog seemed to understand the gravity of what was being revealed, providing a steady, calming presence that encouraged the children to continue speaking. Marcus was grateful for his partner's instinctive understanding of the situation and how to support traumatized children. The second twin explained that their daddy had been acting differently all day, not just angry but scary in a new way that made them want to hide even when he wasn't shouting. Children often picked up on subtle changes in adult behavior that might escape other adults, and these girls had clearly sensed that their father was planning something beyond his usual violence. Marcus, realized that his arrival at the apartment might have interrupted David's plan before it could be carried out. The domestic disturbance call from the neighbors had probably forced David to change his timeline, and the presence of police had prevented him from following through on whatever he had been planning. The thought of what might have happened if the call had come even 30 minutes later made Marcus feel sick. Sarah wrapped her arms around both daughters, tears streaming down her face as she realized how close they had come to losing everything. She thanked Marcus repeatedly, her voice breaking with emotion as she understood that the police response had literally saved their lives. The girls seemed confused by their mother's intense reaction, not fully grasping how serious their father's plans had been. Marcus immediately radioed for Officer Walsh to return to the apartment, knowing that this new information would need to be documented and investigated further. David's charges would likely be upgraded based on what the children had revealed, and there might be additional evidence in the apartment that would support premeditated violence charges. The twins continued to share details about their father's behavior throughout the day, painting a picture of a man who had been systematically preparing for violence. They described how he had cleaned his gun, made unusual phone calls, and spent time writing something at the kitchen table. Each detail added to the growing evidence that David had been planning something far worse than a typical domestic assault. Officer Walsh returned quickly, her expression growing more serious as Marcus briefed her on what the children had revealed. She immediately began documenting their statements while calling for additional investigators who specialized in attempted murder cases. The apartment would need to be processed as a crime scene, with particular attention paid to any evidence of David's planning and preparation. Marcus found himself looking at the twin girls with a new level of admiration and concern. Not only had they survived ongoing domestic violence, but they had unknowingly helped prevent their own deaths by being observant enough to understand their father's changed behavior. Their innocence had been shattered by circumstances beyond their control, yet they had shown remarkable courage in speaking up. Rex remained close to the family throughout the extended questioning, providing emotional support that helped the girls continue sharing their observations. The dog's presence seemed to give them strength and comfort, allowing them to process traumatic memories in a way that might not have been possible without his calming influence. As the investigation expanded, Marcus realized that this case would haunt him for a long time. The thought of what might have happened if events had unfolded differently was almost unbearable. These children had been living not just with domestic violence, but with a father who had been planning to murder them and their mother. Their survival was due to a combination of observant neighbors, quick police response, and their own brave decision to speak up about what they had witnessed. 3 months later, Marcus received a call that changed his perspective on police work forever. The district attorney's office contacted him to let him know that David Mitchell had been sentenced to 25 years in prison for attempted murder, domestic violence, and terroristic threats. The evidence provided by the twin girls, combined with physical evidence found in the apartment, had built an airtight case that prevented David from ever threatening his family again. Marcus had testified in court about that night, describing how the children's observations had revealed the true scope of David's planned violence. The judge had been particularly moved by the girls' testimony, praising their courage while acknowledging the trauma they had endured. Their words had not only secured justice for their family, but had also highlighted the often overlooked impact of domestic violence on children. Rex had also played a unique role in the legal proceedings, with the court acknowledging how his presence had helped the children feel safe enough to share crucial information. The judge had even requested that Rex be present during the girls' testimony, understanding that the dog provided emotional support that enabled them to participate in the justice process. It was unusual for a police dog to be involved in victim support, but Rex's contribution had been undeniable. Sarah had successfully rebuilt her life with the help of domestic violence services and community support. She found a new apartment in a safe neighborhood, enrolled her daughters in counseling, and started working at a local nonprofit organization that helped other domestic violence survivors. Her transformation from a frightened victim to a confident advocate inspired everyone who knew her story. The twin girls were thriving in their new environment, attending school regularly and participating in activities that helped them process their traumatic experiences. They had continued to ask about Rex, and Marcus had arranged several visits to the police station where they could spend time with his partner. These visits had become a bright spot for both the children and the police officers who had worked on their case. Marcus found himself deeply affected by the long-term impact of that night. He had always taken pride in his police work, but this case had shown him how a single response could literally save lives and change the trajectory of an entire family. The experience had reinforced his commitment to thorough investigation and had reminded him why community policing was so important. Rex seemed to remember the family as well, always showing excitement when Marcus mentioned their names or when they visited the station. The dog's ability to form emotional connections with the people they helped was something Marcus had always admired, but this case had highlighted just how important those connections could be in the healing process. The case had also led to changes in how the police department handled domestic violence calls involving children. Marcus had worked with supervisors to develop new protocols that ensured children's observations were documented and taken seriously, recognizing that kids often noticed details that adults might miss. The twin girls' experience had become a training example for other officers. Sarah had written a letter to Marcus and Rex, thanking them for saving her family and describing how much their lives had improved since that terrible night. She included drawings that her daughters had made of Rex, showing the dog with angel wings and surrounded by hearts. The artwork now hung in Marcus's locker at the police station, a daily reminder of why his work mattered. The community response to the family story had been overwhelming, with local businesses and organizations providing support to help Sarah and her daughters establish their new life. The domestic violence shelter where they had initially stayed had used their story, with permission, to raise awareness about the hidden dangers that children in abusive homes often face. Marcus often reflected on the moment when the twin girls had spoken up about their father's plans. Their courage in sharing what they had overheard had not only saved their own lives, but had potentially prevented David from harming others in the future. Children's voices, he realized, were often the most honest and important in situations where adults might be too frightened or manipulated to speak the truth. Rex continued to work with Marcus on domestic violence calls, his presence providing comfort to other traumatized families they encountered. The bond between officer and dog had deepened through their shared experience with Sarah's family, creating an even more effective team for helping people in crisis situations. The last time Marcus saw the twin girls, they had grown taller and more confident, their smiles genuine and their laughter echoing through the police station. They still remembered that frightening night, but it no longer defined their lives. Instead, they had become advocates for other children in similar situations, sharing their story at age-appropriate community events designed to educate people about domestic violence. As Marcus watched the girls play with Rex in the station's break room, he realized that this case had taught him something profound about resilience, courage, and hope. Sometimes the smallest voices carried the most important messages, and sometimes a police officer and his dog were in exactly the right place at exactly the right time to hear those voices and act on what they revealed. The twin girls had not just been saved that night, they had been empowered to help save others, creating a ripple effect of healing that would continue long after their own trauma had become a distant memory.